They considered him too poor, too weak, and too skinny for the NBA. Not the guy you bet on, not a future superstar, just another kid who was given a chance. And even then, without any big expectations. At 18 years old, Giannis was drafted, and back then he looked more like someone who was just trying to survive in the league rather than someone who was going to change it. No superstar aura, no huge predictions, just an ordinary skinny kid who was simply lucky enough to end up in the right place. But then a story began that nobody could properly predict. 8 years passed, and that same kid had already become the best player, won a championship, and completely changed everything around him. So how does a nobody, a weak kid that nobody needed, become the person who changes the entire game? That's exactly what we're going to break down in this video. The Milwaukee Bucks were a unique team. At the beginning of their existence, they looked like the perfect project. Just 3 years after being created, the team won an NBA championship. It was almost unimaginable for such a young franchise. They had a superstar-level player, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. It seemed like Milwaukee could become the next NBA dynasty, but things turned out to be much more complicated. Milwaukee was a small city with a small market, limited opportunities outside of basketball, and a cultural environment that didn't fit Kareem as a person. All of that affected him, and he wanted something more. Eventually, he requested a trade and moved to a team with bigger opportunities. For Milwaukee, it was a devastating blow. They lost the face of their franchise, and the team stopped being a consistent championship contender. A feeling began to grow that the organization simply couldn't keep its best players. Milwaukee kept losing the battle for players' attention. Everyone wanted to go to bigger and more attractive cities, places like Los Angeles, New York, or Miami. Nobody was dreaming of coming to Milwaukee, and the situation with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was not an isolated case. A similar story happened with Ray Allen. He was one of the best young players in the NBA and was viewed as the future face of the franchise. But even he couldn't overcome Milwaukee's lack of market appeal, limited opportunities, and questions about the team's future. Eventually, he also left the organization, first requesting a trade and then being moved. A belief started to form. If you wanted to win a championship, you had to go somewhere with money, a big market, and other superstars. That's why we saw moves like LeBron James joining the Miami Heat or Kevin Durant joining the Golden State Warriors. But Giannis Antetokounmpo was different. He never requested a trade. He never demanded to leave. He never chose the biggest market. He stayed where he was given a chance to prove himself. He stayed loyal to the organization that believed in him, selected him in the draft, and was the first to see his enormous potential. And then 2013 arrived, the NBA draft. Giannis was selected by the Milwaukee Bucks with the 15th overall pick. But why him? At that time, there was nothing about him that stood out. He was extremely skinny, physically weak, and didn't have a strong professional background behind him. He was only 18 years old and had never played at a high level. He was playing in the second division of Greece and was nowhere near physically ready for the NBA. But that was exactly the reason why Milwaukee decided to take a chance on him. Giannis's story doesn't begin in huge arenas or with a future that everyone predicted for him. It begins somewhere completely different. He was born in Greece into a family of Nigerian immigrants. His parents moved from Nigeria in search of a better life, but for a long time the family lived in extremely difficult conditions. They didn't have financial stability. You could say they were simply trying to survive. His parents struggled to provide for their children, and Giannis, along with his brothers, tried to help the family and earn money however they could. And that is exactly why many teams were unsure about him. From the outside, it looked like he was too young, too skinny, and too inexperienced. He lacked physical strength, he was still learning how to understand the game, and he had almost no experience playing serious basketball. But that was only the surface. In reality, Giannis had something that couldn't be seen through early evaluations: an unbelievable work ethic. He was willing to work until the very end, improve every single day, and fight for his dream. He had an enormous desire to prove that he was capable of achieving something greater. And that is what Milwaukee saw. While other teams focused on his weaknesses, the Bucks saw his potential. They saw his incredible growth, his long arms, his speed, and his unique coordination for a player with his size. That's why selecting Giannis wasn't just about choosing a player. It was a bet on the future. Milwaukee didn't have a big market. They didn't have established superstars who wanted to come to the team. So they decided to take a risk and select an 18-year-old kid that almost nobody knew. But in 2013, nobody looked at Giannis and said, "This guy is going to become one of the best players in the world." Actually, many people thought he would spend 1 or 2 seasons in the NBA, then disappear and return to a less competitive league. But Giannis proved them wrong. A few years later, he became an NBA MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and an NBA champion. The player who was considered a long-term project became the person who changed the entire history of the Milwaukee Bucks. And when Giannis moved to the United States in 2013, for most people, it could have looked like a real fairy tale. You are only 18 years old, you are a highly promising player, and you already have an NBA contract. But Giannis saw it completely differently. He barely knew the language, he didn't understand American culture, and he didn't have his family or brothers beside him. All of that created a huge amount of psychological pressure. His first NBA contract was nothing like the experience of most young players. For an average person, the first big paycheck means new things: a house, cars, and finally the opportunity to enjoy life. But for Giannis, everything was different. He grew up in poverty himself, and he understood perfectly that his family still needed his help. That's why he sent most of his salary back home to his relatives. But even despite that, his family couldn't immediately be there with him. They didn't have stable citizenship. There were difficulties with paperwork, and moving to the United States became a very difficult process. Giannis's first months in America were very simple. His life consisted of training, recovery, improving his physical condition, and learning the game. He was completely focused on basketball. He knew exactly why he was doing this and who he was working for. His daily routine was almost always the same: gym, training, sleep, back to the gym. Giannis didn't need luxury. He wasn't interested in simply enjoying money or fame. He wanted to prove that he was capable of achieving something greater. And soon, one of the most emotional moments of his life happened. His parents and brothers were finally able to move to America. For many people, it might have looked like a normal moment, a family simply reunited with their son. But for Giannis, it was something much bigger. At that moment, he could finally say, "My family is here. Now we are together." That moment had a huge impact on him and helped him mentally moving forward. He was no longer alone in a foreign country. And this mentality explains Giannis's relationship with Milwaukee. This team gave him a chance. They believed in him when many others had doubts. You could say Milwaukee helped him rise from the very beginning and build a new life. And Giannis never forgot that. He valued this opportunity, he was grateful to the organization, and he always remembered who was the first to believe in him. And by the time Giannis reached his next contract, he was already a superstar. By 2020, everything had completely changed. He was no longer the 15th overall pick that people viewed as just a promising project. Now he was an NBA MVP, one of the best players in the world, the leader of the team, and the face of the Milwaukee Bucks. But this time, the situation was completely different. Now it wasn't Milwaukee worrying that nobody would want to come there. Now they were worried that their own superstar wouldn't want to stay, because the NBA itself had changed dramatically. In the past, players were more likely to build dynasties with one team, stay loyal to their organizations, and try to achieve success where they started. But the modern league became different. Superstars started changing teams more often in search of a better opportunity to win a championship. For example, LeBron James spent years trying to win a championship in Cleveland, but he didn't have the necessary support around him. Eventually, he moved to Miami, where he joined forces with other stars, created a powerful Big Three, and gave himself a better chance to compete for a title. Kevin Durant also spent years trying to achieve success with Oklahoma City. He had a talented team around him, with players like Russell Westbrook and James Harden. But after losing in the Western Conference Finals, he decided to join the Golden State Warriors, where a championship system was already built. And many people expected Giannis to do the same. He had every reason to leave. He was an MVP, one of the best players in the league, and he could choose almost any team that would give him a better chance to win a championship. But Giannis was different. He remembered where everything started. He remembered that Milwaukee chose him when almost nobody believed in him. They gave him an opportunity, gave him a chance to prove himself, and helped him become the player he was today. And that was exactly why he didn't want to leave. But this path was extremely difficult. Giannis faced enormous pressure. People told him that a player as great as him was wasting his best years on a weak team, that he was wasting his prime, that he needed to move to a bigger market and join other superstars. But Giannis didn't care about the criticism. He stayed loyal to his decision. He believed in Milwaukee, and he wanted to prove that championships could be won not only in big cities and not only through super teams. The 2020 to 2021 season arrived. It was supposed to be the one. Milwaukee had a great regular season and finished as the team with the most wins in the NBA. The roster was experienced, and Giannis himself had already become an experienced player. He had a strong team around him and a real chance to win a championship. In the playoffs, they defeated Miami and then faced Atlanta in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then, with only a few steps left before the finals, the moment happened that changed everything. Giannis suffered a knee injury during the game. At first glance, it looked like a devastating injury. Nobody knew what would happen next. Some players take more than a year to recover, while others never return to the same level after serious knee injuries. And suddenly, hope seemed to disappear. The team's biggest leader, their best player, one of the best players in the world, was injured. But Giannis couldn't stop. His desire was too strong. The examination showed that there was no major structural damage, and surgery wasn't required, but he still needed more than a month to recover. You could say the season was over. But for Giannis, it wasn't. He saw the opportunity, he saw the goal, and he was determined to reach it. His knee was still injured. The risk of making the injury worse was real, but to him, those were just empty words. He showed incredible dedication, mental strength, and character. He said, "I want to do this for Milwaukee." He wanted to bring them a championship. He remembered everything Milwaukee had done for him, and he wanted to do the same for this team. He was willing to risk himself for the team, for the city, for the fans, and most importantly, for his family. And Giannis continued the final series while playing through the injury. It was an incredibly difficult battle, but even with that injury, Giannis inspired his team with his actions, and they started fighting even harder. And then he won the championship and took home the Finals MVP award. It was a historic moment. The Milwaukee Bucks had not won a championship in more than 50 years. And finally, the team, together with Giannis, made it happen. They believed in that little kid, an 18-year-old, skinny, fragile-looking player, but they believed in him. And now Giannis had led Milwaukee to a championship. The organization invested time, trust, and resources into him, and all of it completely paid off. Giannis grew together with the franchise. From a rookie, he became a leader. From a promising prospect, he became one of the best players in the world. Giannis could have chosen the easy path. He could have joined several superstars and maybe created a dynasty. But he chose a much harder path, and the one that was right for him. He chose to keep fighting until the end with the team that chose him from the beginning. But unfortunately, every story has its ending, and this story had a beautiful one. In the summer of 2026, he was traded to the Miami Heat. From that moment, a new chapter of Giannis's career began, this time with a different team. He said goodbye to Milwaukee. He said goodbye to the fans. And now, a new journey awaits him in Miami. If you enjoy these kinds of NBA player story breakdowns, subscribe to the channel. There will be many more stories about legendary careers, tough decisions, the fight for legacy, and the moments that changed the history of basketball.